Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneider, joined as always by my co-host Nick Velato, and apparently his dog Phoenix today as well. Look at that face. Look at that cutie. He's just chilling over there, Phoenix. It's hot out, boys and girls. It's hot, man. It's been just 9 days in a row, just heat with no break. I thought a storm on Saturday would change it, but it did not break it. So the heat is here. The offseason is here. We're waiting until training camp. Some of us are spending our time like Nick, getting nice haircuts and getting himself together. Some are spending time like me on a golf course, and others are spending our time in strip clubs, tossing out thousands of dollars. Nick and I don't have that luxury like Malik Neighbors does, though. We didn't get the signing bonus.
I do love how people are like, oh, no, he's at a strip club. It's like, oh, a 20-year-old at a strip club. Go figure. Like, come on, man. What are we doing here?
I mean, allowed to enjoy his time. I remember I saw Carl Banks tweet about this. Like, he's like, yeah, like we can't wait to see the overreaction. The first reporter is going to ask him about this in the first day of training camp. And he's like, then Carl Banks was listing off like 4 different places that he used to go when he was a player for the Giants. It's like, whoa, Carl's just like naming names of places. Like, you don't take it that far, Carl, but I do understand the sentiment.
Carl like the party.
These are kids. They want to have fun and they want to party a little bit, and they should. It's their off time. This is, time to relax. Honestly, I'd rather him be at a strip club, Malik Neighbors, than on an ATV. Okay, potentially something dangerous like that. Spending on your off time, you can't get hurt in a strip club. You can lose money, but you can't get hurt. Or I shouldn't say lose money. You can spend money.
You could catch something at a strip club.
He's helping the college funds of a lot of young women around the country. There,
he's a benevolent man.
Yes, look at it like that. But Hard Knocks episode 2 for the Giants is coming as well tomorrow. So we'll do a podcast covering that. I'm excited. Art Stapleton has suggested it's going to be a fun one for Giants fans. We're excited to see that. And I think that's going to help us get through to the start of training camp. But these podcasts will hopefully also help you get through. And we're going to be continuing to preview the positions for the Giants. We head into the 2024 season. We've done wide receivers. We've done running backs. And today we are doing the tight end position, Nick, which had a bit of a different feel than we expected going into the offseason because the Giants drafted a tight end who we really liked. And another one of their tight ends retired, and that's Darren Waller. So what's your overall thought and feel on the tight end position as we head into 2024?
I just find the tight end position fascinating over the last couple of years. If we go back to the first year with Brian Dable, remember it was like Ricky Seals-Jones and Jordan Akins. And we were talking about those players. Neither of them made the team at the end of the season because of injuries. And Jordan Akins, I think, ended up getting waived. And then Daniel Bellinger, this rookie that the Giants drafted on day 3, ended up seizing a pretty significant role. And then Tanner Hudson worked in. Last season was like, we got Darren Waller. Darren Waller is going to be the focus of the offense along with Saquon Barkley. That obviously did not materialize as we would have liked. And now it's Daniel Bellinger, it's Theo Johnson. It's this mixture of Chris Manhertz and Jack Stoll. It's this odd group along with Lawrence Cager, who is getting a lot of hype. Jordan Raanan of ESPN has said he was the biggest riser of players that were unexpected through the offseason, the minicamp and all of that. I look at the tight end group, and it is significantly, I would say, better overall, not from a star power standpoint, but from a depth standpoint, meaning depth at blocking. Last season, they did not. We had brought this up so much on the podcast, Dan, about how Daniel Bellinger's injury against Seattle hamstrung the Giants, rendering Darren Waller into a role where he had to block because Lawrence Cager is a former wide receiver and isn't really a blocker either. Giants only had 3 tight ends on their roster last year. That significantly hamstrung them. Now the Giants at least have depth there, and all the tight ends right now, other than Lawrence Cager, they're all blockers. Chris Manhertz, that's essentially an offensive lineman. Jack Stoll can block. Dude went to the University of Nebraska, was blocking for years in Philadelphia. Theo Johnson can block at 260 pounds. We saw that to a solid degree at Penn State, and then we all know what Daniel Bellinger can do. So is it the most exciting group on the team? No, it is not. Does it have star power? No, it does not. But can it block and allow a run game to flourish? And are the weapons good enough to operate in a play action passing attack? And are they athletic enough to stretch the seam? Yes. And that's all I want from this tight end group on this team with Malik Neighbors as the focal point.
I think that's fair. And I think for me, the questions start really with one, what will the identity of the offense be, and how different will it be from what the identity was or what was supposed to be and what we saw in flashes when he was healthy? Darren Waller, in 2023, because there were times where it looked strongly, starting with the preseason game, the Cardinals game, among others, that this offense was designed last season to revolve around Darren Waller being the focal point of the passing game. That is going to be a massive, massive departure from what we saw last year because there is no Darren Waller in this offense. You can hype up Lawrence Cager all you want. Jordan Raanan saying he has a good offseason. I remain skeptical that Lawrence Cager will play out a large share of snaps. I even think Lawrence Cager is personally on the raw, potentially on the roster chopping block. He may make the roster, but I don't think it's a guarantee. I think it's way more likely these other tight ends make the roster.
To your point, Dan, about Darren Waller being the focal point, we all knew that going in, but what sparked the comeback against the Arizona Cardinals in week 2 when the Giants were getting their asses kicked out there in Glendale, Arizona? It was that deep post to Jalen Hyatt. Why was that deep post to Jalen Hyatt open? It was because it was a quarters coverage by the Arizona defense where the safety to Jalen Hyatt's side sat down on the cross from Darren Waller, allowing Jalen Hyatt to have inside leverage against an outside leveraged cornerback to have the middle of the field wide open because there were so many eyeballs paying attention to Darren Waller.
Yeah, you're right. And it was a good job by Jones, by the way, on that one to recognize that and make the throw to the post, to deep post to Jalen Hyatt. But that's going to change so much this year because that offense, the design was to run through Waller. That there's no one on this roster that's going to be. I will say, we say, oh, there's no star power like that. But I think on this roster, Theo Johnson has, at least from an athletic standpoint, more upside than people realize. Athletically comparable to Jimmy Graham. We both agree on tape he's not as athletic as the testing numbers suggest. But I also think we both agree on tape there's a lot more meat left on the bone for Theo Johnson from a receiving standpoint due to the horrific quarterback play he dealt with at Penn State, the bad timing from the quarterbacks there, and just his lack of involvement or his lack of designed targets within that offense. Like, it just wasn't run through Theo Johnson. Not to say it will be for the Giants, but there is upside in my mind for him to become a focal point of this passing game at some point in his career, though most likely we'll see, at least in year 1 of this new version of this offense, Malik Neighbors be the focal point, we hope, of this Giants offense. That's at least the hope to happen right away. So within that, we know we're phasing out that run through Darren Waller, run through the first tight end aspect of the offense. So now what role would these guys have in the passing game? Because I think it's pretty clear that all of these guys, like you mentioned, can block. Theo's the one I'm most skeptical about as far as blocking goes, but that's just because he hasn't done it at the NFL level, and it's a jump to go from college to the NFL. But within that frame, you can look at it like this offense will change not only through who's going to be the focal point, Darren Waller, but also through the personnel usages and packages, because, there may be fewer examples, at least we see early on, of 12 personnel and 2 tight end sets. 7th most last year of three wide receiver sets among all teams, which I was surprised to see.
Logic would suggest that it would be, but at the same time, I think a lot of this also depends on if the Giants can maintain any sort of advantage in their 12 personnel package with these tight ends against what the defense they're going up against, how they respond to that. And I just think defenses are going to play the Giants slightly different now because there is no Saquon Barkley back there, because it is Devin Singletary. There might be more of a focus on stopping the passing attack, more eyeballs on Malik Neighbors, who will be the focal point of the offense, as I previously mentioned. But to the Theo Johnson point that you brought up, I would love for him to be a nice secondary option, him or Daniel Bellinger, a nice secondary receiving option behind Malik Neighbors. But you would argue it's Wan'Dale Robinson or it's Jalen Hyatt. But he's going through a lot right now. He says that this offense is a little bit overwhelming. I think the quote that he used was, learning this offense is like drinking water out of a fire hose, which is very consistent with a lot of the things that we have heard about it. I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do. I also am not 100% sure if he's going to earn an early role with Chris Manhertz, Jack Stoll, and Daniel Bellinger being the veterans on this team. What do you think about that? I mean, he could. He very realistically could. I'm not sold that that's a definite thing.
No, I think you're right. I think, we hear a lot about this. This is such a common theme we keep hearing about this Giants offense being difficult to pick up, very, timing based, option routes for the receivers. They have to be sharp within each play. They have to be sharp every day of practice to try to pick this up. And then we hear it applied to Theo Johnson a little differently than Malik Neighbors. And maybe that's because Malik Neighbors was drafted to fill a specific role, and they're going to kind of try to get him into that role right away. With Theo Johnson, you might have a little bit more, like you said, a room to let him grow into the role. I also think there's a lot more, like, to be a tight end is a lot different than to be a wide receiver in the NFL, because you have to also pick up the blocking side of it. You also have to pick up the protection side of it, like the run blocking and the pass blocking side of it. There's more responsibility on the plate of a tight end. We see this all the time in the NFL. Tight ends take so long to develop. Tight ends take so long to really jump into a role. It doesn't always happen. Sam Laporta obviously was able to earn a role right away with the Lions and play incredible amount of snaps. Even to an extent, Daniel Bellinger in his rookie season, I think played like 84% of the snaps or something like that, at 84% snap share. One of the best, highest rates in the league with the Giants, but it doesn't always happen that way. So I think you're right. There's going to be, maybe we start training camp and Theo Johnson is running with the third team, and we keep seeing that. And we're like, what's going on here? And it said, no, don't panic. Don't worry about this. It's going to take a little bit of time.
Both Chris Manhertz and Jack Stoll in the John Schmelk interview said, yeah, this is a very complicated offense. Jack Stoll mentioned something to the effect of, This is a complicated offense, but once you master it, it allows you to play fast, which is something that if you guys want to listen back to the wide receiver podcast, you and I discussed. But Chris Manhurt said, yeah, I've been a part of a lot of offenses, been with a lot of offensive coordinators. This is by far and away the most complicated offense. But Chris Manhurt specifically really just wants to maximize the potential of the room. And he seems to be this old man kind of coming into the room and saying, this is what we have to do as blockers. And that's the primary point of this podcast that I want to convey. And it's something that if anybody listening to Big Blue Banter podcast for a while would know is we wanted for so long, Dan, a tight end room who could block. We wanted a tight end room who could freaking block. And I think with the presence of Chris Manhurts, Jack Stoll, Daniel Bellinger, and possibly even Theo Johnson, as I mentioned previously, we actually have that now. But there's going to be a drawback from the explosive nature of the tight end room now without Darren Waller, even though we didn't really get to experience that to its full degree because Darren Waller was injured a lot last year and the Giants were an absolute shit show.
You ever feel sluggish or out of focus? Are you stressed? Has your digestive system caused discomfort or flatulence like a certain co-host on this podcast during a live stream? If so, you should check out AG1. When I started drinking AG1 daily, I could feel a real difference in my daily health. I had more energy, I was better off at the gym, and I could focus on my work in a much more efficient manner. That's because AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health. Not only did I replace my multivitamin with AG1, but I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut support. I recommend AG1 to all my family and friends because AG1 has a team of doctors and scientists that formulate around the latest science and maintains high quality standards within the industry. Even my friends have started drinking AG1, and they always tell me how energetic they feel and how it's helped them out at the gym, and also it's helped them manage their stress levels. That's why we're happy to have AG1 as our partner. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs when you first subscribe. Go to drinkag1.com/banter. That's drinkag1.com/banter to check it out. Our mental and physical well-being is of the utmost importance. Whether you're a world-class athlete or a podcaster like me, we all need to take that very seriously. That's why I'm excited that Unified Healing is sponsoring this episode of the Big Blue Banter podcast. Unified Healing is a new and super innovative global network of wellness centers powered by Energy Enhancement System, or EE System. If you haven't heard of the EE System yet, you'll want to listen up. This technology promotes wellness, deep relaxation, purification, and rejuvenation. Whether you're here in New York, New Jersey, Arizona, if you will, or hundreds of other locations across the globe, access to a center is easy and affordable. Interested in experiencing the EE System technology for yourself? Go to unifiedhealing.com/banter to learn more and find a center near you. That's UNIFYD healing.com/banter. No material or testimonials on the Unified Healing website are intended to be viewed as medical advice or a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment. And before undertaking a new healthcare regimen, include EE System.
Yeah, you're right, Nick. And I think the focus on what you were saying, I think the reason we wanted that and the reason the Giants wanted that, I mean, you can touch on examples that you've mentioned in the past that we've talked about. For example, that Seattle Seahawks game on Monday Night Football when they were down so many tight ends that they just had nothing. They had to alter their entire game plan. And it was a night where you really, really could have used a tight end who can help block on the edge next to your right tackle. And Theo Johnson talked about these, like the biggest learning curve by far has been the protections, picking up the, where to be on third down from a protection standpoint. that he said he's confident he'll be ready from that regard for training camp. We'll see. It's going to take time. But the guys who will be ready for that, because they've proven in the past, are Manhart, Stahl, and Bellinger. And the thing is this, Nick, I almost feel like, maybe the Giants looked at their everything that's gone down with this offense over the last 2 years and have decided in some senses that we want Evan Neal to be who we drafted him to be. We can't be for sure that he is going to be that player. So if we have a tight end next to him, we can sacrifice having one fewer guy in the route protection, in the route concept to maximize our protection. You have a tight end who has put it on tape. He can block and he can help you in pass protection. Now you have a 6-man protection on these obvious passing downs or even these non-obvious pass downs off of play action, whatever it may be. 6 men in protection, 3 men out, Wandell, Hyatt, and Neighbors, Hyatt, and Slayton, or any combination of the Giants receivers that we've talked about in the past. And you have a better chance to actually succeed on your play, despite having one fewer guy running a route, being that tight end, because now you have a 6-man pass protection. You can slide to the right. You can put Andrew Thomas on an island. And really at that point, you're giving Evan Neal everything you can possibly give him to be successful on a play. You've already slid the protection to his side. You've also added a tight end into block. It shouldn't on paper help you. Like if you have 5 men sliding to the right there and you have Andrew Thomas on an island, I ought to feel like the Giants pass protection should be at an all-time high.
What you just said is the pillar of the Giants offense too. You can slide protection to the right and leave Andrew Thomas on an island if the defensive front allows you to do that.
Right.
You have that security blanket of Andrew Thomas's skill set there for the New York Giants offense. And as we've said through this offseason, Dan, what is the biggest Achilles heel that could hold Daniel Jones back? It would be Evan Neal. So if you have a tight end next to him, and he doesn't have to be in the protection the entire time. If we go back to 2022, when Evan Neal was a rookie, a lot of Daniel Bellinger's catches, they weren't him running up the seam. They weren't him running these deep horizontal crosses. They weren't him running these flag routes. It was him blocking for about a second and a half, and then detaching. And then Daniel Jones finding Daniel Bellinger for a quick little outlet pass, 6, 7, 8 yards. Daniel Bellinger breaks a tackle, falls forward. That could be the primary method of receiving from the New York Giants tight end room. I would like it to be a little bit more, but if you mean that you can secure the offensive line and that would allow Daniel Jones to actually use the entire field, give him some time, and it sacrifices the tight end, as you were saying, then yeah. And that tight end becomes a security blanket once he ends up blocking, engaging, passing the guy off to Evan Neal or Devin Singletary if it's a 7-man protection, and then releasing, and then he's like, hey, Daniel, I'm open. Throw me the damn football. And that's something that I think we've seen in the past, and it has been successful, and it just matriculates the football down the field 6 yards, 7 yards, gets you into a third manageable situation if Malik Neighbors or Darius Slayton or Jalen Hyatt are not open down the field.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think as we look at this tight end group, long-term, there's hope in my mind for it to be, especially with Theo Johnson, to me, with his skill set, as you can use this tight end position as now a vertical threat and an intermediate threat in your offense, and he's running up the seam and we're hitting him. But for the short term, with where this offense is at, specifically the offensive line, like, yes, they've added players, but it's been 2 horrific years. Not 2. It's been 10 horrific years in a row of offensive line play. For the short term, I'm looking at this tight end group as the group that can help shore up this pass protection. So normally you go into a season with your offensive line, you're like, okay, I'm banking on some protection, taking an upgrade. We've made some moves in the offseason. Let's hope that this 5-man group can get it together. I don't know. I think for the Giants right now, their best bet is hoping that a 6-man group on a consistent basis can get it done. And with that 6-man not being an offensive lineman, but instead being a tight end, to me, that's the number one duty right now of this tight end group to start. It's the blocking, because I do honestly believe that you can sacrifice a man running. You can sacrifice one of your route runners on any given play with the talent they've accrued at wide receiver between Neighbors, Wandell, Hyatt, Slayton, and even to my mind, like players like Isaiah Hodgins, who I do like when they're on the field. You can sacrifice one man in the route, and especially when you have like a guy like Tyrone Tracy maybe out there, even Singletary, who's maybe not the best route running receiver, but he can definitely take dump offs and do work with that. Sacrifice a man to upgrade the protection. That's right now the plan for me, or like the goal of this tight end group for 2024.
I would say, for the first part maybe, but you also want as many routes out there if you can, because then even if it's not to like be the primary focal point or the primary read, it just distracts other defenders and leaves up space for Malik Neighbors or Darius Slayton or whoever else, right? I wanted to, since this is the offseason and we're having fun, Dan, what do you think the rumors about Daniel Bellinger, where are they coming from exactly? We saw Connor Hughes.
I think it's just
bold takes. You think it's just bold takes?
It's not bold takes. It's like So you have, I think it's from Connor Hughes and from Ron. A few of the beats have just been like speculating that maybe the Giants will cut Bellinger and keep Lawrence Cager, for example. Like, I think a lot of it just has to do with there's limited media availability during OTAs. So they're at one or two of these practices. And I'm talking about the ones before training camp, what we just went through. And, when they were at the one or two that they were at, Bellinger wasn't involved. And using that, you can make draw these huge conclusions. Now, I personally believe that that's not enough evidence to draw a conclusion. For starters, I don't think the Giants are showing much to the media. Secondly, I find OTAs to be very vastly overrated as far as predictability moving forward. I think they're mostly just get the guys on the field, get them back with the team, help the kind of team. And even to the extent where the NFL, Nick, has even discussed getting rid of OTAs entirely. They would never discuss getting rid of them entirely if they actually had significance to these teams, to these coaches, and to these like general managers, right? Like they'd be like, no, we're not getting rid of that. We need that to have a good season. But I think everyone kind of agrees we don't actually need that. There's no pads. I mean, to the extent I am personally, me, I don't even find training camp to be that important or predictive. I think it's good to get them back on the field. But this version of what we have left in training camp, where you can't do 2-a-days, you can't really hit anymore, it's kind of just try to get the timing down in the passing game is the way I look at training camp. It doesn't really show me much about O-line. It doesn't show me much about D-line. It doesn't show me much about the run game. I think
you're talking about like the effect of like the players having success against other players, but it's very important from the mental side, learning the playbook.
Mental side, learning the playbook and timing of the passing game. Those are the three things I think you can actually get down in training camp. Run game, I think, is vastly overrated from anything you see in training camp. Pass rush, vastly overrated, means almost nothing, and pass protection means almost nothing. I mean, we see it, man. The Giants are wholly unprepared from a pass protection standpoint year after year after year, despite showing good signs of it in training camp. And that's every team, man. It's not real live. It's not. What is it? It's no pads. It's you have some padded practice.
Fundamentals.
You can't hit the quarterback. Right. It's fundamentals, which are extremely important. But even then, it's not really tackling fundamentals, right? You can't really go through the full process of that. So it's fundamentals from a technique standpoint. So for pass rushing and pass protection, those are important things. But again,
it's an introduction to just what the coaching staff is
yes
from you. It's
That
it's definitely important. It's not like though, oh wow, Trey Hawkins, he just shut down Isaiah Hodgins. That means that's where it gets a little bit overhyped, of course.
Even though I actually think there's more to do with the pass, like the one-on-ones with the wide receivers and the corners. To me, that's more than anything you see in the run game in training camp, and to a lot of extent, to me, the pass protection, which I think is the most wholly overrated when it comes to training camp. And it's very difficult to make that transition from training camp to regular season games, as we've seen with the Giants pass protection, and not just the Giants, plenty of other teams. But just to tie it all together, Nick, when you asked about the Bellinger side of this, so if you see him not on the field, right, as they're seeing in these limited media OTAs, they might lead to speculation that he's not going to be a part of the offense. Let's wait, or part of the team, I should say. Let's wait until training camp to see his involvement within the team, right? If he's obviously not practicing then or playing much then or down with the third team offense, now I'm concerned. Because at the very least, I don't believe training camp can tell you too much about how you're going to play against other real teams in the NFL, but it can tell you about the depth chart, right? That's the one thing you're definitely going to get out of training camp, what the depth chart looks like and how it shapes up.
And even then, it could be bullshit, or not bullshit, but it can be overcome, like we saw with Darius Slayton in 2020. It seemed like Darius Slayton was just out the door in 2022, and then homeboy ended up battling back because David Sills and Kenny Golladay weren't really getting it done.
That is a good point, though. He was buried on the depth chart in training camp back in the 2022 season. So it is tough. It's tough to gauge anything from, but I will definitely start to speculate a little bit more on the Bellinger situation if he's not playing much in camp, which I don't think is going to be the case. Because again, I don't think these predictions are based on much at all, but very limited ability. And it's not based on what Brian Dable's thinking or Joe Shane's thinking. I can tell you that they're not getting that information.
No, they're not. Oh, Phoenix is barking. Doesn't like something you said, I suppose. No, but then, okay, so one other thing I want to ask. So some of these guys on the Giants roster, Jack Stoll, Chris Manhurst specifically, they're more blockers. How do you think Brian Dable, Mike Kafka, and the Giants offensive coaching staff, Tim Kelly, the tight ends coach, are going to balance putting these tight ends out there and not putting the pass catchers out there all the time in passing situations? That would be more so Theo Johnson and Daniel Bellinger, because you don't really want to tip your hand to the defense as to what you're going to do.
It's a great question. That's why I'm wondering, like, if there's a possibility that these guys could be used, not both of these guys, but one of these players could be used specifically early on, like you said, you don't want to cap your offense, but as just simply like your extra man in pass production that could leak out occasionally. Because you even mentioned it, some of the production from the tight ends 2022 was just leak out type of production. That could be the same thing. Exactly. Like me, I've seen offenses work like that.
So remember, man, Daniel Bellinger was kind of that leak out guy. Now,
Yeah.
I think both of us agree that he has a lot more to his skill set. But Tanner Hudson early in that season was the downfield tight end. Remember against the Chicago Bears, I think he caught one near the sideline, or maybe it was another game, but he was also the tight end who was down the field blocking on both of those long Daniel Jones touchdown runs on the play action boots that Daniel
against the Bears.
Yeah. But we also saw Tanner Hudson being used down the field. Obviously, Darren Waller. We haven't seen enough, I would argue, of Daniel Bellinger in that role. And I can understand it because his rookie season, he's learning the offense and he's adapting. So let's use other tight ends who are veterans and who are more accustomed to playing in the NFL in that role, which might be a little bit more complex. And last year, he was competing with Darren Waller. So why would you use Daniel Bellinger in that role? This season, though, I'm hoping that we do see him up the seam a little bit more, hoping we see him run some sail sevens as we saw against the Raiders with Tommy DeVito, I think, who hit him on that sail 7 after Daniel Jones's injury. So I'm hoping to see that. And I'm hoping to see Theo Johnson in that role as well. But I also just don't want the Giants to tip their hand too much. And it's like every time Chris Manhertz is on the field,
right, it's a run play. Yeah,
or
you're right.
Protection.
True. That could, you don't, anytime, that's the whole point. Like the reason why these great coordinators have worked in the NFL, the McVays of the world, is because they do the best job of marrying the pass and the run game. That means you can't, and that Jason Garrett, this was a big issue for Jason Garrett in my mind when he was coordinator of the Giants. He did a really poor job of that. And when you become that kind of coordinator, it makes it really difficult when you have like a receiver coming in that's an obvious blocking receiver, and then he motions back into the formation. It's like, what are you doing, dude? Now you've just really tipped your play off completely. And this guy's never running, you only have him on the field and run plays. So you have to be careful of that. That's why these two-way tight ends are so valuable. It's why, in my mind, Nick, if we're talking just ceiling of this position in 2024, to me, it's mostly Bellinger and Theo Johnson taking almost all of the snaps, because both of those guys can be two-way tight ends on any given snaps. And I'm not saying Manhertz and Stahl can't be two-way tight ends potentially, or Cager for that regard, though Cager I would probably say can be. But for a fact, if these guys hit their ceiling, both Bellinger and Theo Johnson can give you that every down. You don't know if it's going to be a run or a pass.
I agree. And as for Stoll, I know he's mentioned in the past that he hopes to actually kind of earn a role more as a receiver. He thinks he's a better receiver, and he went down the tight end with Daniel Bellinger, as Daniel Bellinger told us here on the Big Blue Banter podcast. But as for Chris Manhertz, I think he even said on the Schmelke interview, that was something to the effect of, I have a defined role here on this team. They want me to be the, big presence as a run blocker. Sure. And that's what he's been his entire career. I've loved Chris Manhertz since I started watching him. I think he can actually be a difference maker if he makes this team in a very niche role where he might only play, 10 snaps a game, 9 snaps a game, but they can be very important snaps on first down or whenever, or in short yardage situations, because the guy is almost like a smaller offensive lineman out there.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because they didn't have that depth at tight end to do things like that, have a niche role, like an 8-snap a game type of role that could help your offense, which also begs me to wonder, Nick, like we're getting tight, like when it comes to roster projections.
Dude,
if you're going to keep 4 tight ends this year, let's say, or 5, let's say, if Cager, which I doubt, but even 4 is a heavy number. Now you've got this crowded receiver room. You've got this crowded running back room. You're running out of numbers from a 53-man roster, especially if you want to keep DeVito off the practice squad, if you're worried about losing him at quarterback. Now you have 3 quarterbacks. So it is interesting to see where they're going to pluck that player or two and cut him because of just the numbers game. But I honestly hope it doesn't come from the tight end group, because even if it's only 8 to 10 snaps a game, I'd like to have a Chris Manhertz type on the team.
Same. I'm wondering if there's going to be a roster spot battle between Manhertz and Stoll. Like, let's say Daniel Bellinger is safe, Theo Johnson is safe, and say Lawrence Cager, they just love him and they want him to make the team. It does seem like they have valued him since they added him to their practice squad and then elevated him against the Seattle Seahawks in 2022. We saw like a design play in the red zone for him and then another wheel route for him in that game, his first game as a New York Giant. But there might be only one spot for Chris Manhertz and Jack Stoll, for the reasons that you just said. Tyree Jackson is also on the roster. I want to throw his name out there. I think he's more of a long shot, former Buffalo quarterback going back to his college days, but he's also on the roster, former Philadelphia Eagle. But yeah, that could be an interesting camp battle. And I do like Jack Stoll's game as like a third tight end, but I do think Chris Manhertz just brings something so profound to the offense for a niche role. Just something the Giants haven't seen since I don't even know who. It's like Bear Pasco, somebody who is somewhat comparable, but I don't even think he was even
not Bear Pasco.
He was like more of a big H-back.
Who would it be? If the Giants had a Chris Manhertz type, when was the last? Like, obviously, if you go back to like,
I mean, Martellus Bennett, but he was just a dynamic,
such a dynamic receiver. Yeah.
But my point is, he had a great blocking ability. He was obviously far beyond Chris Manhertz. We haven't had a pure blocking type.
Maybe like Jake Ballard.
Maybe he had some receiving chops to him,
but Ballard had too much receiving shot, right? Like, but who knows? Maybe Manhertz has that, but I don't know. Maybe that's more of a Jack Stoll type if you're going to look for the Ballard comp. But
I think that's a good call.
Yeah, but it's an interesting group. I'm hoping they keep 4, to be honest, and that 4 would not include Cager for me. It would be the other 3. Again, I think Jack Stoll, and you may think they're similar, Jack Stoll and Manhertz. I think Stoll, I agree with Stoll. I think he has more receiving chops than people realize. I went back and looked at some of the times the Eagles actually used him in the passing game during these Dallas Goedert injuries, and I thought I saw a better athlete than I was expecting to see going out there. And sometimes you just don't get opportunities in the passing game. The Giants have had this happen throughout the years. Daniel Bellinger, I feel like, has been underutilized in the passing game, to be completely honest, based on what I've seen. And he's not the first guy who's gone through this.
No, he's not. And he probably won't be the last guy, unfortunately.
That's happened. That's what happens at the tight end position, to be honest. It's not always a big part of the offense, especially if you're billed as like the blocking type. But we'll see what happens. It's a group that I think is not star-studded, but has more upside than people realize. And more importantly, the depth the Giants didn't have last season is now there. And again, if they are struggling in pass protection with Evan Neal, now you at least have a proven guy like Chris Manhertz who can come in and provide for you a 6-man pass protection.
So Chris Manhertz has been in the NFL since 2016. He has 26 career receptions. Daniel Bellinger has been in the NFL for 2 years, 25 in 2023 alone, and then he had 33 in 2022.
And so he didn't play a lot of games because he got injured in 2022.
No. Right. Yeah, exactly. He got punched in the eye by that Jaguars linebacker. Jaguars. How you say
Jaguars?
That? Jaguars. No.
It's all right.
It sounds very indistinguishable to me.
Not to me. You're using an I and I'm using a noir, like an OI. Like, have you ever heard of a noir?
Noir, yeah, like a film noir.
Yes. So now
it's a
Jaguar.
Jaguar. Do this for me, like that kind of thing.
OI is the sound you're looking for.
Okay. This is fun. This has been a fun podcast, everybody. But yes, I think it's going to be interesting, though, to see the camp battle between who's going to, because there's several camp battles here in the tight end room. There's who's going to earn that primary tight end role. There's who's going to be in the 12 personnel package. And there's going to be who the hell's going to make the roster. And then there's the Lawrence Cager factor, which I feel like is somewhat separate than this. Obviously, he falls into who's going to make the roster. He's a completely different skill set than really any of these guys, because he's just basically a big, tall, fast wide receiver who is deemed a tight end.
Yeah, exactly. And so we'll see what happens. Thank you so much for tuning into Big Blue Banter Podcast. There's another position preview. Keep it locked and loaded. Hard Knocks episode 2 is coming out tomorrow. I don't know when this will drop, but it's
coming out Wednesday. The Hard Knocks
Wednesday for us. Yeah. Oh yeah, for us, as far as the episode will be Tuesday, we'll be recording on Wednesday, most likely for that. And then we want to get back into some other things we haven't been doing as much this offseason that have always been fun. So mailbags, we're going to do some mailbags coming up soon, maybe a live show as well. So those are 2 good offseason things to get back into. So we'll talk about that off pod and we'll get that going for you guys, and girls. But thank you so much. By the way, I still, one problem I have, Nick, which I'm trying to fix, is still refer to people as guys. When I mean, guys and girls is what I mean. It's just like a old habit. Hey guys, what's up, guys, like that type of thing. But you don't want to say that anymore. So you people, I should say, or guys and girls, I'll just say, and everybody,
you're a misogynist.
Anyone who's listening. I don't want to misgender anyone or do anything like that. So thank you to everyone who's listening and supporting our show. But again, remember, we're going to have some mailbags coming up, some lives, recapping Hard Knocks. We're going to do everything we can do to get you through. I actually saw something interesting as well, Nick. We don't have the film. I've been looking for the film of the Giants playoff runs to break down. We don't have that, but there are full games. If we ever want to do like a just broadcast angle breakdown, maybe we can consider that for some of these games if we can't get the film. But I still would like to get all 22 on some of the Giants playoff games. If anyone has it, reach out to Nick or me, and get that going. But anyway, have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon.